Remember when a children's show couldn't decide if it wanted a real human host chatting through a toy shop or a fully animated clay universe, so it just did both every single week and nobody seemed to mind that whiplash? Well, that was the Gumby Show. Gumby snuck onto NBC as a segment on Howdy Doody, and by 1957, he had his own half hour, courtesy of Art Clokey, a schoolteacher with a movie camera and a block of clay, who handed the network a hero whose entire superpower was refusing to hold a shape for more than 5 seconds. You've got Gumby, the bendable green kid who somehow solves almost every problem by just staying calm. Then you've got Pokey, his loyal orange pony, happy to follow him into whatever weird situation comes next. Add Prickle, Goo, and the rest of the crew, and you've got a cast that sounds completely random until you actually watch them. And today we're going to count down 15 weird facts that you didn't know about the Gumby Show. And stick around for number 1, because it's all about the bizarre true story behind Eddie Murphy's foul-mouthed Gumby and why Art Clokey absolutely loved it. But before we begin, hit that like button and subscribe. Gumby's whole philosophy was bend, don't break. The same logic, it applies to your thumb and that subscribe button. All right, let's step into the fun shop. Number 15, Art Clokey handed 100 years of Gumby to a pizza shop. 2 University of Florida finance majors dropped out in 1985 to open a pizza place in Gainesville and named it after one of them. Jeff O'Brien's nickname was Gumby, earned by refusing to take off a green warm-up suit in the exact shade of Clokey's character. So he and Chance Hippler put Gumby's Pizza on the storefront and went to work. Then they went straight to Art Clokey and walked out with the trademark rights for 100 years. 100 years! The same man who guarded the character like a family heirloom for 40 years handed a full century of pizza rights to 2 college dropouts, and they leaned all the way in. Garlic and cheese logs of dough became Pokey sticks, and Gumby's face went on the top and the bottom of every box, which the founders happily admit was so the branding would still land from the bottom of a dorm garbage can. The Gainesville original is still the busiest store in the chain, running on a bar rush that keeps the phones going until 4 in the morning. 40 years later, and they're still opening in college towns, while Gumby's TV revivals have come and gone. The breadsticks outlasted the cartoon, and the company swears that Clokey became a regular. Vegetarian pizza, vegetarian sub, every visit. The gentlest man in children's television was quietly eating dinner in the loudest restaurant in all of Florida. Number 14, Gumby did Toy Story first, and then Toy Story ran him over. A toy shop, shelves packed with toys, and every one of them is alive the second that nobody's watching. That's Gumby's very first appearance. A pilot called Adventures of Gumby, a sample, was shot on January 29th of 1955. It never aired. It was filmed in a converted garage on a budget of basically nothing. Pixar would take that exact premise and turn it into an empire 40 years later. Clokey shot it the same day that his daughter Anne was born, which is why January 29th is Gumby's official birthday. The kid and the clay arrived together. But then the arithmetic turns cruel. Gumby's one and only movie hit theaters in October of 1995. The budget, $2.8 million. The box office, around $57,000, which is roughly the price of a nice new car. Toy Story opened a month later, rewrote animation forever, and did it with a premise that Clokey had already shot by hand back when a computer couldn't render a beach ball. The title card on Clokey's film said Gumby 1. There was never a Gumby 2. It did find its people eventually. On home video, the studio says it moved close to 1 million copies, which is a polite way of saying that, yeah, we lost in theaters, but we won the living room. Woody and Buzz, they still walked off with the sequels and the theme parks. Gumby, he walked off with a title card counting to 1. Number 13, Gumby's eyes are black because 1950s TV couldn't see red. Gumby's eyes started out red, so did Pokey's. And on the black and white sets that everybody actually owned, those red pupils came through as the exact same dull gray as the rest of their bodies. The eyes were there, just nobody could see them. To be fair, early puppets had bigger problems. The first test models had no hands at all, just kind of a bare gap where the mouth belonged and a color that was closer to murky teal than the bright green that anyone pictures now. He looked less like a children's hero and more like something forgotten in the back of a fridge. The eye fix was blunt. You swap the red for little black discs, shoot it again, and suddenly, the kid, he has a face. Then color television arrived and made the whole problem irrelevant. And nobody changed him back. Black eyes were Gumby now. Red only crept back decades later, on the toys, which is where it stayed. So if you had a bendable Gumby on your shelf as a kid, those red eyes were closer to Art Clokey's original design than anything that you ever saw on TV. Number 12, Gumby is destroyed by the one thing that he's famous for, Every time Gumby morphs, stretches, flattens, folds himself into something else, the clay loses its shape and doesn't fully come back. So he isn't animated so much as consumed. According to Clokey Productions puppet maker Nicole LaPointe McKay, a single minute of finished animation could burn through 20 Gumbies, sometimes even more. 20 for 60 seconds of screen time. The studio lights only made it worse, softening that clay until a puppet has to come off the set entirely. The kid's whole philosophy is bend, don't break. And the actual job of being Gumby, well, that's breaking him constantly. Which is why every replacement has to be identical down to the millimeter. He's mixed from a secret Van Aken clay recipe, melted in a double boiler until the color runs even, and then poured into a mold around a floating wire armature, Gumby's skeleton. He cools, sometimes in a refrigerator to speed things up, and then he gets popped out, trimmed along the seams, patched where the bubbles formed, and given what the studio genuinely calls an oil massage to smooth him down. A faceplate marks where the features go, and then somebody sits there and builds his face by hand. All of that for just a couple of seconds, before the next one takes his place. Gumby's been replaced more times than the drummer in an average rock band, and he's never noticed once. Number 11. The producer who financed Gumby didn't want a dime back. Art Clokey's day job was teaching at a military academy in Los Angeles, and on the side, he tutored one of his students in English for extra cash. The student's father was Sam Engel, a producer at 20th Century Fox and the president of the Motion Picture Producers Association. Engel appreciated the help. He started inviting Clokey and his wife Ruth to the studio to watch previews, and eventually he asked to see this little art film that Clokey kept bringing up. So Clokey hauled in Gumbasia, 3.5 minutes of clay blobs writhing to a jazz score. Engel ran it in Derek Zanuck's private projection room, 100 seats, an enormous screen, and a room built for movie stars, now showing lumps of modeling clay to a bunch of studio professionals who all had somewhere better to be. Engel was floored. He got up, he paced in front of the screen while the projectionist rewound, and asked whether Clokey could turn that clay into little figures who tell stories to kids, because he thought that children's television deserved better than what it was getting. Clokey said, sure, why not? Engel financed it, and when Tom Sarnoff at NBC came back with a 7-year contract, the man who paid for the whole thing waved it away. You take it, Engel told him. I don't want anything from this. No credit, no cut, no ownership. He wanted something decent on television for children. He got it, and then he left the room. 60 years of Gumby exist because a rich kid needed help with his homework. Number 10. A 12-year-old kid accidentally changed internet law. David Van Allen ran an internet provider in Pennsylvania, and for his son Christopher's 12th birthday, he bought the kid a domain name. Christopher's nickname was Pokey, so the domain was pokey.org, the best birthday present of the decade. And then the letter showed up. Prima Toy Company, the Clokey family's trademark holder, sent a cease and desist against a 12-year-old over a website about being a 12-year-old named Pokey. The early internet, which was young and mean and had nothing else going on, absolutely detonated. Harvard's domain name archives still file the cases under reverse domain name hijacking, the legal term for the trademark holder leaning on somebody who had every right to the name in the first place. And when the Senate wrote the anti-cyber squatting law the following year, the committee report named Pokey.org specifically as exactly the kind of person the bill was never meant to touch. Then Art Clokey found out what his own lawyers had been doing. He pulled the complaint. He wrote a letter invoking the spirit of Gumby, and then he picked up the phone and called Christopher himself, and the two of them stayed on the line for over an hour. The creator of Gumby apologizing to a 7th grader, telling him that he handled the whole thing the way that Gumby would have. The kid kept his domain. Nobody paid a dime. His father, who had swallowed the legal bills himself, told reporters that his son's allowance was now spoken for until roughly the year 2050. Number 9. NBC canceled Gumby, so Clokey bought him. The Gumby Show ran on NBC with Tootsie Roll picking up the sponsorship, and it made the network real money. Art Clokey was on salary. He'd get $200 a week, later bumped to $350 to write and produce the entire thing. That was a decent living in 1959. So this isn't a starving artist story, it's an upside story. The show was a hit, and Clokey owned none of it. No royalties, no back end, just a paycheck and a character that he had built out of mud and a memory of his father. NBC pulled the plug on November 16th, 1957. And instead of moving on to the next gig, Clokey just turned around and bought the rights back. Gumby, Pokey, the whole cast, out of the network's hands and into his own. In an era when networks kept everything they financed, that almost never happened. Everything after that runs through that one move. The 60s revival, the syndication, the 80s comeback, the movie, all of it. None of that exists if those characters stay in an NBC vault. Then he did something even stranger with all that ownership. He refused to sell anything. For about 7 years, he wouldn't license a single Gumby toy because he didn't want parents thinking that he was trying to exploit their kids. It took an avalanche of fan mail to move him. So he lost a hit show, immediately spent his own money buying the wreckage, and then sat on a gold mine for 7 years out of sheer principle. Number 8, a flop toy sent Gumby to a guru. In 1977, Art Clokey and his second wife Gloria launched a bendable toy called Moody Rudy. Not a Gumby toy, but a brand new character, molded out of a material that the box proudly identified as Expressiflex. I love it. Nobody on Earth wanted a Moody Rudy, unfortunately. They poured money and years into it and got almost nothing back. Broke and rattled, the two of them flew to Bangalore to meet the guru Satya Sai Baba. And Clokey, for reasons that only made sense to Clokey, packed a miniature Gumby in his luggage, which has to be the only time in history that a cartoon mascot went on a pilgrimage to see a guru. Anyways, the way that Clokey always told it is that he stood there holding the toy while Sai Baba moved his arms in a circle, and sacred ash appeared out of thin air and landed right on top of Gumby. Then they flew home, and things started happening. Toy sales climbed. Eddie Murphy started doing Gumby on Saturday Night Live. The phone rang, and Lorimar turned up with an $8 million contract for a brand new series. Clokey spent the rest of his life pointing at that trip as the moment that everything turned. And the documentary that they eventually made about him is called Gumby Dharma. The best part is that he already named the toy company Prima back in the 60s, Sanskrit for universal love. It took him another 15 years to go out and actually look for some. All right, quick pause. If a company named after the Sanskrit word for universal love sicks its lawyers on a 12-year-old over his own nickname, if that didn't at least get a little laugh out of you, go check your pulse. And drop your favorite Gumby memory below. And like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. It helps YouTube find the other people who still remember what the fun shop was. All right, let's stretch into the second half. Number 7, the bump exists because Gumby looked like something else. Cloak's first pass at Gumby was tall, slim, and simple. A clean, upright slab of clay. Then he stood back and looked what he had built and understood that no network on Earth was going to broadcast it to children. His own description of the problem was that Gumby had come out looking like a phallic symbol. So he stuck a bump on the head, off to one side, and the silhouette problem vanished. He also had a lovely explanation ready for anyone who asked. It's the bump of wisdom, he'd say. The one that Buddhist figures wear on the crown of their skull. Gumby's is just sitting a little off-center. The rest of him came together the same way, half art and half plumbing. Ruth suggested basing the body on the gingerbread man. The feet got made deliberately wide for the least poetic reason available, so the puppet wouldn't tip over on set. Clokey settled on a final height of 7 inches and stopped fussing. But the bump had a second reason, and he only talked about it later. There was a photograph hanging in his grandfather's farmhouse in Michigan. His father at 18, with a cowlick so enormous that it wouldn't lie flat no matter what. Clokey said that if you laid an outline of the portrait over Gumby's head, the two matched. His father died in a car accident when Clokey was 9, not long after his parents split up. The most recognizable head in children's television is a censorship dodge, a Buddhist symbol, and a boy remembering his dad's hair, all in the same lump of clay. Number 6, the Gumby host America thought had died on live TV. September 20th, 1955. Pinky Lee is 22 minutes into a live children's broadcast when he grabs at himself, looks straight into the camera, and asks somebody to please help him. Then he goes down. Nobody moves. The kids in the bleachers keep cheering because Lee's entire act was screaming and flailing. So this man collapsing just looks like every other Tuesday. The director thought it was a bit, but Lee lay there writhing for something like 10 seconds before the camera finally cut away to the applauding children. This wasn't a heart attack. It was exhaustion and a vicious sinus infection catching up with a man doing a live show every weekday, plus a Saturday one NBC had piled on top. But the rumor got out first and never left. For decades afterward, newspapers ran items about the late Pinky Lee. One of them printed it while he was performing at a dinner theater in the same city. His show never recovered. He was off air for months. The Mickey Mouse Club walked away with the audience, and NBC pulled the plug in June of 1956. Then he got one more shot, hosting the Fun Shop on the Gumby Show starting in June of 1957. He made it to November 16th, the same day that NBC canceled Gumby. The man survived his own television death and got 5 months out of it. Number 5, Google hired Gumby's own animators to make a Google Doodle. October 12, 2011, Art Clokey's 90th birthday. and Google turns its homepage over to Gumby. Not a drawing of him, but a toy block with a G on it and 5 clay balls sitting there in the Google colors. If you clicked one, it popped open into the Blockheads, or Prickle, or Goo, or Pokey, or even Gumby himself, all of it moving in Clokey's own stop motion. Google could have handed that to any animation studio on Earth, but instead, they called Primavision, Clokey's studio, and put Joe Clokey in charge of making sure that every movement looked like something that his father would have shot himself. The crew pulled it off long distance, over phone and Skype and email, on a deadline, molding delicate puppets of every character just to squeeze out a few usable seconds each. It's the same brutal arithmetic that Art was dealing with in the 50s, now compressed into a rush job for the most visited page on the internet. A company that didn't exist when Clokey was pushing clay around a homemade studio ended up hiring his own people, using his own methods, to honor him on his own birthday. Not bad for a lump of mud that started out on black and white television. Number 4, the man who kept Gumby alive never saw him sold. Joe Clokey was not raised to run a clay empire. He was a plant guy. At 8 years old, he was growing succulents and cacti and hauling them in a wagon to sell at a nursery down the road. He took a horticulture degree at Cal Poly, wrote a column in the student newspaper called Captain Ecology. He served as president of the Native Plant Society and built a business distributing educational films about agriculture and sustainability. He named his 3 kids Shasta, Sequoia, and Sage. And then his father died in his sleep in 2010. And Joe, known his entire life as Gumby's little brother, took over Primavision alongside his wife Joan. He spent the next 8 years as a caretaker instead of a rebooter, remastering the whole Gumby library from the original camera rolls, running museum exhibits and festivals and parades, and standing around at Comic-Con shaking hands with people who loved this stuff since 1957. In November 2017, he and Joan published Gumby Imagined, the definitive book on his father's life. 4 months later, on March 2nd, 2018, Joe Clokey died of cardiac arrest in Santa Barbara. He was just 56 years old. In February 2022, Fox Entertainment bought Gumby outright. TV, film, streaming, merchandise, the whole character from Joe's estate. The green kid who never ages got handed to a corporation, and the man who spent his life protecting him wasn't in the room. Number 3, the church wrote a $1 million check to the Gumby guy. In 1958, the president of the United Lutheran Church in America set aside $1 million of the church budget to build a children's television show from scratch. And then the church went shopping for somebody to make it, and landed on the man who's animating a green blob of mud. The Clokeys said yes on the spot. Art had actually studied at a seminary before he ever picked up a camera, and Ruth was a Lutheran minister's daughter who had run education programs for the National Church straight out of college. This wasn't a cold call. What the church got back was Davey and Goliath, a boy and his dog, except the dog talks constantly and Davey's the only one who can hear him. In any other genre, that's a symptom, but it premiered in February 1961 and worked, running into the 70s and taking real swings at prejudice, loss, and death in a slot that was meant for kids in pajamas. Ruth kept the thing alive for years after Art had drifted on to other work. And by most accounts, the money that the church paid them helped bankroll Gumby's own comeback in the 60s. So the man who stuck a Buddhist bump of wisdom on his hero's head paid for that hero's revival with Lutheran money. And decades later, Davey and Goliath got yanked out of retirement to shill for Mountain Dew. And the royalties from that funded a Christmas special, a cartoon dog, a church budget, and a soda ad. Every link runs back to just a lump of clay. Number 2, Gumby's voice was credited to Art Clokey's dead father. Gumby's first voice never auditioned for anything. When he showed up on Howdy Doody in 1955 and 1956, he was being voiced by Ruth Eggleston, the wife of the show's art director, Al Eggleston. And Al Eggleston is the man credited with inventing Pokey. One household handed Gumby his voice and his best friend. That's how small this operation was. If you were in the building, you're getting cast. Eggleston voiced him until 1957, when Dallas McKennon took over and became the definitive Gumby, carrying the character through the 60s, the 80s revival, and finally the 1995 movie. Meanwhile, Art Clokey was voicing Pokey and Prickle and Gumby's father Gumbo, which means that Gumby's creator spent decades playing Gumby's dad. Now, go look at the credits of Gumby the movie. McKennon's name isn't on them. The voice of Gumby is credited to a man named Charles Farrington. Charles Farrington was Art Clokey's father, the one killed in the car accident when Art was 9. He's the one in the photograph on the farmhouse wall, with the cowlick that became the bump on Gumby's head. So in Gumby's only feature film, the character built out of a picture of Art Clokey's father was credited by name to Art Clokey's father. And number 1, Eddie Murphy's Gumby was a secret portrait of 2 real, bitter men. For most adults, the Gumby that they actually remember isn't Art Clokey's. It's Eddie Murphy with a cigar snarling, "I'm Gumby, damn it!" And according to Barry Blaustein, who wrote the sketches with David Sheffield, it was never a Gumby impression at all. Murphy was doing 2 real men at once. His first manager, Robert Wachs, and Pat Cooper, an aging comic who had spent his career in Las Vegas tearing down every performer within reach. Gumby was just the costume. It came out of a writer's room where they were sitting talking about childhood television. They landed on Davey and Goliath, Clokey's church show. They kicked that around, drifted over to Gumby, and Murphy started riffing on the idea of Gumby being bitter. It aired on March 27, 1982, with Gumby getting interviewed about his all-tell memoir, titled, "I'm Gumby, damn it!" A lesser man would have called his lawyer, but Art Clokey, he became a fan. Blaustein's explanation is beautifully unsentimental. Clokey loved it because Gumby toys started selling again. And then he went further to give SNL permission to dub Murphy's dialogue over footage from real Gumby episodes. So the gentlest cartoon in television history came back on the air cursing at people. Murphy kept him alive for decades. He brought him back on Weekend Update back in 2019. And this past April, when Murphy accepted the AFI Life Achievement Award, Gumby turned up to pay tribute to him. The Clay Kid outlived everyone, and then went out of his way to thank the man who ruined him. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird facts about the Gumby Show. Which one bent your brain the most? Well, tell us in the comments. And subscribe for more slow, strange deep dives into the shows that raised us. One melting puppet at a time. Until next time, remember, bend, don't break. This is Remember When.